In just 4 minutes and 17 seconds, one housing audit destroyed Labour's immigration credibility forever. I've covered 20 humanitarian committee hearings. I've witnessed ministerial resignations, policy collapses, and career assassinations. But what happened at 3:23 p.m. on December 12th in Committee Room 12 wasn't just parliamentary oversight. It was systematic obliteration of Yvette Cooper by a woman who had built an unbreakable case of the largest asylum seeker exploitation scandal in British immigration history. Kemi Badenoch walked into the Home Affairs Committee, carrying a reinforced portfolio sealed with National Audit Office and Home Office investigation stamps. She looked like a prosecutor who had assembled evidence to destroy a criminal network built on exploiting the most vulnerable asylum seekers. What none of us knew was that portfolio contained housing contracts exposing $3.8 billion in asylum accommodation diversions to shell companies controlled by Cooper's political network. But she didn't open it immediately. The silence before evisceration was suffocating. Committee Room 12 went deadly quiet. Not respectful parliamentary courtesy, but absolute silence when everyone knows they're witnessing a Home Secretary's reputation destruction. At 3:22 p.m., Cooper's principal private secretary received an urgent, encrypted message. Her face transformed from confident to horrified as she whispered something panicked to the Home Secretary. Cooper's humanitarian credibility cracked. Her immigration advisor was frantically checking emergency communications. He looked like someone who knew 3 years of asylum policy expertise was about to be exposed as Westminster's biggest refugee exploitation. And then Badenoch opened her portfolio. Home Secretary, she began, her voice carrying prosecutorial authority. I want to discuss asylum seeker accommodation and concerning financial irregularities brought to my attention through National Audit Office intelligence cooperation. Standard opening, nothing threatening. Cooper looked relieved, confident. Her media team were preparing responses about conservative attacks on refugee support policies. But Badenoch's portfolio was positioned precisely, open to a tab marked with serious fraud office seals. This wasn't routine questioning. This was systematic prosecution. Shadow Home Secretary, Cooper replied in her Yorkshire accent, this government remains committed to providing dignified accommodation for asylum seekers through legitimate housing providers that reflect our values of humanitarian protection. Perfect parliamentary deflection. But Badenoch wasn't interested in refugee philosophy. She was building towards something devastating, like an investigator with documents to destroy fraudulent claims. Home Secretary, she said, removing a document, are you familiar with the Asylum Housing Coordination Trust, established in Manchester on May 18th? The question hit the committee like immigration dynamite. Cooper's expression didn't change, but I watched her hands. They went rigid. When Home Secretary's hands stop moving during asylum discussions, their survival instincts have activated. Shadow Home Secretary, Cooper replied, maintaining composure but lacking confidence. The Home Office works with numerous accommodation coordination bodies as part of our comprehensive approach to asylum seeker welfare. Wrong answer. Catastrophic. When asked about a specific Manchester trust with a specific date, generic answers suggest massive cover-up. Badenoch pulled out a second document with Home Office investigation stamps and National Audit Office markings. Home Secretary, she continued, gaining momentum, according to these financial audit documents, the Asylum Housing Coordination Trust has processed $3.8 billion in asylum accommodation contracts since a shockwave rippled through committee observers. $3.8 billion represented nearly the entire annual asylum accommodation budget. But Badenoch was just beginning her systematic evisceration. And Home Secretary, she said, producing a third document, these files show that only £890 million of those funds ever reached actual asylum seeker accommodation. The committee fell silent. Not parliamentary courtesy. This was MPs processing information that could destroy careers and trigger criminal investigations into refugee exploitation. Cooper's immigration advisor leaned forward, his policy training inadequate for criminal allegations. Her media handler stopped checking her phone, staring at Badenoch with disaster shock. But what happened next changed everything. Cooper shot forward, her humanitarian composure evaporating. Shadow Home Secretary. These allegations represent serious mischaracterization of legitimate asylum accommodation coordination processes. Home Secretary Badenoch interrupted, cutting through the protest. Are you denying that you personally authorized housing contracts for £2.97 billion in asylum funds that have disappeared from official accommodation audit trails? Silence. Absolute silence. For 26 seconds, I counted. Cooper said nothing. 26 seconds in Home Affairs Committee proceedings equals admission of refugee exploitation guilt. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed. The confident humanitarian champion was gone, replaced by panic with a Yorkshire accent. I authorized numerous accommodation contracts as part of the Home Office's asylum coordination responsibilities. I cannot recall every specific housing arrangement from complex accommodation procurement. Devastating response. When a Home Secretary says, I cannot recall about £2.97 billion in missing asylum funds while claiming to protect refugees, it sounds like systematic exploitation fraud. Badenoch opened her portfolio one final time and removed the smoking gun that ended Cooper's humanitarian political leadership. Home Secretary, she said, her voice now carrying absolute authority. Perhaps this will help refresh your accommodation memory. She placed a property photograph on the committee table. The image showed Cooper at an exclusive Lake District resort, celebrating with champagne, while asylum housing contractors were visible in the background. This photograph was taken at Langdale Hotel in the Lake District on August 14, 2023, while asylum seekers slept rough in Dover. The same weekend that £1.2 billion in accommodation funds were transferred to accounts that immigration auditors cannot trace. The timing was devastating. Luxury weekend, same location. This wasn't asylum protection. This was documented enrichment by someone who claimed to champion refugee welfare while secretly stealing their accommodation funds. Cooper's face drained of color. Her hands were visibly shaking. Not parliamentary nervousness, actual trembling visible to every committee member. In the Home Office section, her immigration team was typing frantically, sending emergency damage control instructions to every government department. But Badenoch wasn't finished eviscerating Labour's humanitarian Home Secretary. Home Secretary, she continued, producing another document with immigration enforcement seals. I also have internal Home Office communications showing you personally overruled immigration enforcement recommendations that flagged the Asylum Housing Coordination Trust as a potential fraud operation. At 3:27 p.m., 4 minutes after she'd begun speaking, Yvette Cooper experienced complete humanitarian political breakdown. Her voice was barely audible through committee microphones. Shadow Home Secretary, these documents lack proper immigration context. Asylum accommodation requires complex coordination arrangements with various housing providers. She stopped mid-sentence. 28 seconds of silence. I have never seen a Home Secretary unable to complete a sentence during committee proceedings. The silence was broken by Badenoch's calm response. Home Secretary, I'm not questioning complex arrangements. I'm questioning £2.97 billion in asylum funds that disappeared while refugees slept in car parks and doorways. The accusation hung in the room like humanitarian poison. This wasn't just about housing policy. This was about systematic betrayal of refugee trust by the politician who claimed to champion asylum seeker welfare while secretly enriching her network. Cooper's immigration advisor was whispering urgently in her ear, but even he seemed to recognize that standard damage control was inadequate for refugee exploitation allegations of this magnitude. Furthermore, Badenoch continued, opening her final folder, Immigration Enforcement Analysis, confirms that these missing asylum accommodation funds were systematically diverted to accounts controlled by luxury property networks throughout the Lake District, Yorkshire Dales, and Scottish Highlands. At 3:28 p.m., Cooper made the decision that ended her humanitarian credibility. We will need to review these allegations with our legal teams and provide appropriate responses through established Home Office procedures. Wrong answer. Politically fatal. When accused of stealing £2.97 billion in asylum accommodation funds, you don't promise to review allegations, you categorically deny or admit guilt. The committee chamber erupted in chaos. Conservative MPs demanded immediate resignation. Labour members stared at phones, reading urgent messages from party headquarters. Several quietly left the chamber, strategic retreat from a sinking Home Secretary. In the parliamentary press gallery, immigration correspondents were typing frantically. The Guardian's Home Affairs editor spoke urgently. This could end Cooper's political career. We're watching Labour's humanitarian credibility collapse in real time. As the committee concluded, I overheard conversations confirming everyone's thoughts. She's finished. Immigration enforcement investigation within hours. The $3.8 billion asylum housing fraud wasn't just about accommodation coordination. It was about a humanitarian champion who had systematically betrayed refugee trust by stealing their housing funds while claiming to protect asylum seeker welfare. By 5:30 p.m., Cooper scandal was trending globally. By 6:15 p.m., immigration enforcement confirmed immediate investigation. By 7 p.m., 8 refugee charities demanded emergency Home Office meetings. Every major channel ran wall-to-wall Asylum Gate coverage, exposing the Home Secretary as a refugee fund-stealing hypocrite who betrayed humanitarian responsibility for personal luxury. And it all started with one portfolio, carried by a woman who had built an unbreakable case against Labour's humanitarian Home Secretary. What I witnessed wasn't just committee procedure. It was the moment when audit evidence obliterated humanitarian authenticity, when documented fraud defeated refugee theater, and when forensic preparation destroyed a leader's entire compassionate political identity. The Home Affairs Committee continued that evening, but everyone knew the outcome. Cooper's credibility as refugee champion was finished. Her authority as asylum protector was destroyed. Sometimes immigration justice takes years through tribunal investigations. Sometimes it takes 4 minutes in Committee Room 12. On December 12th, I watched Kemi Badenoch prove that in British politics, documented evidence always defeats humanitarian performance. If this exposure of refugee betrayal restored your faith in immigration accountability, don't just watch, like, share, and subscribe to our channel, where asylum scandals get exposed and humanitarian lies get prosecuted, no matter which Yorkshire accent they hide behind. Hit the bell. The next refugee scandal might involve your local MP. What would you do if you discovered your Home Secretary had been stealing accommodation funds from asylum seekers? Drop a comment below. This analysis is based on Home Affairs Committee proceedings and immigration enforcement documentation. All dialogue and specific details are dramatized for educational and commentary purposes.